Turn the sound up on the computer. It took me a minute to work out how to go live. Um, right, I can see the chat. Try to get rid of YouTube's things. Can everybody hear me? Trying to close down all these windows I don't want open. Okay, well, I'm assuming it's working. Nobody said no, they can't hear me. Oh dear, right, Freya, you going to say hello? Paw, good paw. Other paw, good other paw. High five. Good girl. There you go. There you go. Good girl. Good girl. Always have to start everything with treats for Freya. Right, please let me know if there's any problem with the volume or anything, because this is only my second live stream. Hey, Deeks. I'm assuming that means you can all hear me and everything. Yeah, as well, it's the third live stream technically, if you include the one I did to test the live stream, but I'm not very good at live streaming. So, hi, welcome to the launch party for Creepy Classics, Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome. Woo! I have a drink. I have the book. I have Freya. So, oh dear, this is very low key. I'm used to it really, because I had my only child in the middle of COVID, so my baby shower was online as well. Oh, thanks, Jim. Yeah, what I thought I'd do, basically, I will introduce the book. I will very briefly talk through, introduce the stories and what Roman text or texts they are inspired by / based on. And then I'll open it up for questions. Any questions about Roman ghost stories? Doesn't have to be about the book specifically. General Q&A on ancient Roman ghost stories. So, Creepy Classics is out tomorrow. It is available for pre-order on the Kindle now, but it is properly out tomorrow, 1st of October, in paperback and ebook form from Amazon. Just sticking to Amazon for the moment, but if it does well, I would definitely hope to do sequels and maybe a second edition and make them a bit more widely available. But for practical reasons, just Amazon for the minute. And it is a collection of 13 ghost stories. They are short stories inspired by ghost stories from ancient Rome. Some of them are from poetry or mythology. Some of them are from history, letters, folklore. So it's a real mix in terms of the origins of all these stories. 12 of them originally featured on my podcast, Creepy Classics. That is available from hopefully wherever you get your podcasts. It's hosted on Podbean otherwise. In the Creepy Classics podcast, each episode, I start with a short story retelling an ancient, medieval, or early modern ghost story. Pardon me, the sound you can hear is Freya tip-tapping along the floor, by the way. She needs her claws trimmed. And then once I've retold the story, I do a little discussion, a little kind of, here's how I adapted it, this is where it's from, and a few tidbits on the various historical bits and pieces from the story. Episodes are every 2 months at the moment. I do hope to go back up to once a month eventually. Don't even ask about the month we've just had. So, again, practical reasons, it's every 2 months at the minute. This is obviously, hopefully, volume 1 of several books based on the podcast. The book is mostly just the stories. I do have a lengthy author's notes section at the back, which is the length of a story. But yeah, mostly the historical discussion stuff. If you are interested in that, check out the podcast. And 12 of these stories originally appeared on the podcast. So if you prefer audiobooks, again, by all means, go listen to the podcast. There is one story that is book exclusive for anybody who has listened to them all on the podcast already. It's still worth buying the book. There is one book exclusive story in here, which is the last one, Dies Irae at the end. So just a quick rundown of the stories. Much debate about which one I was going to open with. A lot of them are quite grim. A couple of them are funny. Trying to decide on the mood for the very first one, the one that everyone's going to read, to decide whether they want to buy the book. That was a lot of pressure, which I hadn't really thought about, because they're short story, not a novel. So None of them are written to be the first one, and I had to choose one. So I went with One Cheap Summer Sandal. This is inspired by a bit of Roman folklore. It's set in Greece, but the story is Roman. It is told by Cicero in his text On Divination and also by Valerius Maximus in Memorable Deeds and Sayings. Cicero's text on divination is a philosophical text explaining why Cicero doesn't believe in divination, but this story is told as part of the argument for before he gives the argument against. And memorable Deeds and Sayings is a collection of examples from history that people could use in rhetorical speeches. So, people giving speeches in a law court or a political speech who needed to say, just like our ancestor of old, blah, blah, which was very common in Roman rhetoric. This was a collection of examples for them. So, it's basically folklore, pretty much. That is about two friends and a sinister inn. Excuse me. This is the trouble with live streams. This is why I don't do them very often, other than the technology issues. I can't edit out all the coughing. I'm going to have a drink. I think that might help me relax. All right. The second one is called The Haunted House. This is an absolutely classic haunted house story. I nearly put it first, but this story has been the basis of so many haunted house stories for so many years that it comes across as unoriginal because this is the oldest version as far as I know. I mean, if anyone knows of any older versions, I'm not very good on like Chinese history. I don't know much about that. So if anyone knows any older versions, then please let me know. As far as I know, this is the oldest version of this story, and it involves a ghost and clanking chains in a haunted house, again in Greece, because the Romans thought that Greece is where witches live, where it's mysterious and it's old, and basically, I was about to say a rude word, weird poop, say the polite way, goes down in Greece, pretty much. So, set in Greece, but from a Roman text. This was told by Pliny the Younger in his letters. He wrote a letter to a friend of his saying, "Do you believe in ghosts?" "I think I do. Here's 3 stories that are the reason I do." Another of the 3 appears later in the book. But that's the absolutely classic, straightforward haunted house story that seems really unoriginal because it's inspired so many haunted house stories. Number 3 is inspired by a play. This is actually the oldest one in this book. Play is called Plautus Mostellaria. And it is a play where, if you picture Jeeves and Wooster in ancient Rome, and that's probably not a coincidence because P.G. Wodehouse was classically educated. So I think Jeeves and Wooster is inspired by Roman comedy and by Plautus. Like again, it's not a coincidence that they're very similar. But if you picture Jeeves and Wooster in ancient Rome, so imagine Bertie Wooster has been throwing a bunch of wild parties, and his father, I can't remember if his father was around in Jeeves and Wooster, but his father is about to come home and he's in a lot of trouble. And Jeeves, or in this case, the slave Tranio, has to get him out of trouble. And Tranio does it by pretending to the old man that the house is haunted to try and keep him out of it so he doesn't find the wild party that's going on. So that one's immediately after Pliny because, of course, Greco-Roman ideas and beliefs about haunted houses are what the comedy play is then making fun of and drawing on for the comedy. So those 2 seem to kind of go together. Excuse me. Deek says wine is the solution. Yes, it is. Apologies, that is a joke. I do not endorse alcoholism. Okay, the 4th one. I nearly put this first, but it's got brief references to some grim stuff in it. I do not enjoy writing really nasty stuff. I love ghost stories, so that kind of spooky end of horror I absolutely love. I love the spooky and the creepy, and I'm about to sing the Addams Family song, but you get the gist. I'm not a massive fan of gore. There's probably some mildly gory bits in here, partly because the Romans really liked gore, which is probably unsurprising because they had gladiators. So there's some gore in there, not too much. I have no desire really to write about DV or assault. The problem is the Romans did not share that particular dislike. So there is very brief reference, as in like a line referring to it, to some nastiness in here. And that is why I didn't put it first, because I didn't want that to be on the first page of the book. I didn't want that to be what people read when they're deciding whether to buy it, because it's not that's not me. There are places where, because these stories come from ancient Romans, I cannot completely avoid it, but I just keep it to the smallest, briefest reference I possibly can, because I just don't that's not what I want to write about. I have no problem with anyone else writing about it or reading about it. It's not me. It's not my cup of tea. And I should not quote Austin Powers when I'm talking about something so serious. But it's not my bag, baby. Oh, Moon Pie says, no doubt some of them were linked to someone having a few glasses. All of them probably knowing the Romans. Mind you, to be fair, Romans diluted their wine with water, and they thought drinking undiluted wine was barbaric. And yeah, something that drunken Celts do. But I am a drunken Celt, so I drink it undiluted. Excuse me. Anyway, so the Dead Marriage is inspired by Apuleius' Metamorphoses, sometimes known as the Golden Ass. One of my favorite Roman texts. I love Apuleius. I think I have a crush on Apuleius. I really do. Fascinating guy. Was accused of witchcraft because he married a woman older than him and had to go to court to be like, no, she just likes me. He was now going to get her money instead of her former in-laws. This whole thing. He's a philosopher. He was initiated into loads of mystery cults. And he wrote this novel based on a well-known folk tale about a guy turning into a donkey. But Apuleius added stuff. He takes the basic framework of the guy turning into a donkey and he adds loads. There's only one story from Apuleius in this book, but I'm sure I'm going to do more from him on the podcast in the future because he's my favorite and I love him. So this is a story about a very bad marriage and the lengths that the wife goes to solve her problem, shall we say. There's a witch in it too. I did enjoy writing the witch. That was good fun. Excuse me. Next one is called A Warning. Oh, I love this text. This is from Propertius Elegies, which is a collection of love poetry. Love poetry for Romans, not as romantic as later love poetry. But I absolutely adore Propertius 4.7, in which it turns out his lover Cynthia has died and her ghost comes to visit him. And it starts with a line that I just quoted outright at the beginning of this story, which is, there are shades of a sort. Death does not end it all. And the whole poem is kind of a reflection on death not being the end, as well as there's a kind of a murder mystery element that crosses over with the next poem, and that is obviously partly the subject of the story. I adore it. I adore that poem. This is one of two stories which I have described as retold rather than inspired, because most of them I've taken the text and I mean, sometimes it's only a few lines of text, sometimes it's a bigger story, but I've adapted it and messed with it. There are a lot more women and slaves in my versions than there are in most of the original versions. But this one from Propertius and a later one from Lucan's Civil War are close to translations. I have adapted them, but the level of adaptation is considerably less, and some of the poetry is really Propertius and Lucan's rather than mine. I can't take full credit for it, so that's retold rather than inspired by. Then we have another funny one. There are two comedy ones, and the only non-ghost, which is a Spanish werewolf in Rome. This is from a very funny Roman novel called Satyricon by Petronius from the 1st century. Petronius, massive snob, and I have tried to make the character snobby without making my story snobby, whereas in Petronius's case, the story, you could feel the elitism coming through the story. So in rewriting it and adapting it, I have tried to make my story not elitist, but a character in it is elitist. So yeah, that's a funny one. It's not, I mean, it's not hilarious, to be fair. I think Petronius thought it was funny because he was laughing at, oh, look at the silly former slaves believing in werewolves. It's fairly straightforward werewolf folklore, to be fair. But anyway, yeah, I enjoy Petronius, even as I realize what an incredible elitist snob he was. Next is A Tomb for a Wedding Bed, which is a tragic romantic story inspired by Phlegon of Tralles on Marvels. So this is some more folklore, another one set in Greece. Weird stuff goes down in Greece, according to the Romans. Um, so yeah, that's romantic and tragic. I mean, you can pretty much work it out from there, probably. Then the last few stories take us chronologically from the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey through to the reign of Nero and sort of touch on emperors and Caesar, who's technically not an emperor. So The Witch of Thessaly is retold from Lucan's poem Civil War, about the civil war between Caesar and Pompey. They themselves do not figure in it very much. They're sort of peripheral to it, but Pompey's son wants to know if he's going to survive the war and gets a witch to raise a zombie to tell him, as you do. The Fault in Ourselves, obviously I've stolen the title from Shakespeare, which is inspired by Plutarch's biography of Brutus, or sorry, Plutarch's biographies of Brutus and Caesar. He tells the same story about 3 times. That is about, now in Shakespeare, Julius Caesar's ghost appears to Brutus. In Plutarch, it's not Julius Caesar's ghost, it's Brutus's own kakos daimon, kakos daimon, which means evil spirit in Greek. Plutarch writes in Greek, although he's writing about Romans. So that is quite interesting. And obviously I've based my story on Plutarch. Sorry, I'm distracted by Gemma saying I raise zombies all the time to answer important questions. This is where I'm going wrong. That's what I need to do in my life when I need advice. I did do a whole video on seances the other week. I could try that. Oh dear, get a Ouija board out. Anyway, yeah, so you might be familiar with this scene from Shakespeare, but it is this kind of mysterious evil spirit rather than the actual ghost of Julius Caesar, although I have kind of hinted at Shakespeare's version as well. Of Blood and Gods is considerably less well known. It's inspired by Suetonius's biography of the Emperor Augustus. Augustus's nursery was supposedly haunted. So I'm laughing at Gemma saying that zombies help her decide what to have for dinner. See, that's where I'm going wrong. Anyway, this is the trouble with me having the chat on. So, yeah, this one is almost entirely made up by me. It's the exact opposite of The Witch of Thessaly and the Propertius one, which are almost translations. Basically, this was a couple of lines in Suetonius where he said that the old nursery where some people said Augustus was born was said to be haunted. And he doesn't even say by whom. Somebody got thrown out of bed. So there's some poltergeist activity. And that's about it. And I just went with it from there and just made up a story relating to the Emperor Augustus and his rather bloody history. So that one was really fun to write because I got really inventive with that one. That was quite good. Home is the other one inspired by that same letter of Pliny where he's explaining to his friend why he believes in ghosts. And also by a section from Tacitus' Annals, because again, the version in Pliny was very short. But the man who is at the heart of it, a man called Curtius Rufus, was also described by Tacitus in his Annals, not relating to ghosts, but just talking about Curtius Rufus. So I have incorporated the section from Tacitus where he talks about Curtius Rufus just and his life as a person, along with the account from Pliny's letter, which is very interesting. It's the spirit of Africa that he sees. So it's not so much a ghost as in the soul of a dead person. He is probably of African descent, but born and living in Rome, and he goes to Africa to work, and he sees the spirit of Africa talking to him. So it's a really interesting story, like historically a fascinating story. I did have to get quite inventive with that one as well, but by combining Pliny and Tacitus, that helped to build a more complete picture of who Curtius Rufus was. Then we have A Tortured Soul. This is another biography by Suetonius. This is from Caligula, his biography of Caligula. Emperor Caligula obviously had a rather dramatic and tragic life, was clearly not well in some way, as well as leading, directly killing a heck of a lot of other people. And then he dies in a very bloody assassination. So he was kind of half burned, and his ghost was said to haunt the garden where he died. So that's what that one's about. And I think we're up to the last one. I've missed the page. Yep, Dies Irae. This is the book exclusive story that has not appeared on the podcast. This is inspired by more Suetonius. Suetonius really likes ghost stories. I like Suetonius. Suetonius is my kind of guy. And he loves ghost stories. He was a friend of Pliny's too. Maybe they had a little ghost story club. I'm like picturing Suetonius and Pliny, and like not Tacitus, he wouldn't join in, but like sitting around doing an "Are You Afraid of the Dark" bonfire now. Anyway, this is stories he tells about Nero and the ghost of Nero's mother hounding him like a fury, like the Greek mythological Furies, and a story about how he then tried to get Persian priests, to raise her spirit to try and get her to leave him alone. So I took some of the details of the ritual to raise the ghost from much older text, from Aeschylus play Persians, which is centuries older than Suetonius or Nero. That's from the 5th century BCE, and it's from Greece. And Aeschylus is Greek, and how much he really knew about Persian religious rituals, I'm not sure. I altered the names of the gods to be Persian gods instead of Greek ones from Aeschylus. I don't think I actually wrote. Yeah, I didn't put. I think I put that in the author's notes that I kind of used Aeschylus for the ritual. Yeah, that seemed like the best. Actually, I don't think I did mention it, but anyway, that kind of seemed like the best source for that particular bit. But the main inspiration for that was Suetonius. Oh, so I have a question. From John Cruz, do you have any recommendations for oceanic lore or mythology? I am horribly uninformed on oceanic mythology. I would love some recommendations, actually. I've been collecting books on ghost stories and folklore and mythology from around the world and trying to find like really good English language resources. And I've managed to track down a pretty good one on Japan just recently. I've got some on Thailand. And some stuff on America, on indigenous American folklore. So I'm getting there. I don't think I have anything from Oceania at the minute. I've picked up some. I'm opening my Kindle app on my computer while I'm talking, because I picked up a few folklore collections that are part of a series. But they've got Japanese, African, Latin American. I've lost the other one, which might have been European or something. I have not yet managed to find a really good one on Oceania, but I would really like to. If anybody else has any recommendations for books on oceanic lore or mythology, then please send them my way. I did some research on Dreamtime. When I wrote my book, Dreams and Dreaming in the Roman Empire, well, before the book, when I wrote it as a PhD, back in the noughties, I did some research on Dreamtime briefly, but I haven't done it. I haven't looked into that in a little while, and it was all kind of academic stuff. Deek says, "Is that a fabric pumpkin on the shelf?" Yes, I bought this at the village market the other day. We have a market in our village once a month, and this is actually a cinnamon stick, which I didn't even realize until my husband pointed it out. So I bought the pumpkin, and my toddler insisted that I also buy this ghost. I'm not very good at the mirrored webcam. So these are going to sit on the shelves through October for the channel. And last year I bought the string of pumpkins from one of the shops in the village as well. I thought I'd do some Halloween decoration. I was going to wear my orange jumper to do my video for this week, but it was a supernatural video. I was like, well, I'm going to have to break out the gender flipped Sam and Dean cosplay outfit. Dean, technically, I'm wearing the Samulet. So I might pull out the orange jumper in a couple of weeks, because the next episode's going to be the podcast and you won't be able to see me. It's back on the shelf. The cinnamon stick does smell quite nice. Oh dear, I've been nattering away for ages. Does anyone else have questions? I say I'm going to do a Q&A and I talk for 25 minutes. This is what it's like to be my student. I'm just agreeing with Gemma in the chat. It's obligatory to have Halloween decor through October. Yes, I think so. I am going to put a little bit of me talking on the front of the podcast video just to flag up the book for anybody who hasn't heard about it yet. I'll have to wear the orange jumper for that. Question from Deeks. What made you decide to publish a book? Well, technically I have books already, to be fair, but they are academic books and they are extremely expensive. And they are also, well, only one of them is written by me. The rest are edited collections where I've written a chapter of it. I've got another one coming out in November, but I've only written a few pages of that one. And I wrote them right off. I came off maternity leave and had to write the coda for this book. And it's all about Bluey and a bit of Star Trek because that was where I was. So yeah, I've got books. I've got academic books out, but I really wanted to write fiction. I've always wanted to write fiction, and I started doing the podcast to kind of scratch that itch as well. I've got various half-finished novels, but time and energy are so lacking, and I realized that I could kind of do a short story because you can write a short story over a day or two. It takes a lot longer to do the research. I try and make the research fit with what I'm doing for my job as much as I can. So I decided I was going to do the podcast based on short stories, and I wanted to try and publish the stories from the podcast as a book. But with traditional publishing, it's very hard to get anyone interested in a short story collection from an unknown author. You really have to be quite famous to get anybody interested in a short story collection, which I think is a shame because I think ghost stories usually work better as short stories. Not that there aren't great ghost story novels. Like I love The Woman in Black, which I think is technically a novella, and I enjoyed what's the Time Traveler's Wife woman one. Her Fearful Symmetry was quite good. Thin Air. If anybody wants ghost story novel recommendations, Thin Air by Michelle Pava was brilliant. And she's got another one called Dark Matter that was good too. Thin Air was amazing. So you can get great novel length ghost stories. But I think ghost stories are really effective as short stories, like M.R. James. Charles Dickens wrote some great ghost stories in short format. So I just thought I'll go ahead and self-publish it because I'm never going to get kind of traditional publishers and agents interested. But I think there's a gap in the market for it. Most of the ghost story collections you see in the bookshop on Halloween, some of them have invited famous writers to come and write a ghost story, some of whom don't even write ghost stories usually. And then the rest are collections of out of copyright stories, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like a very good friend of mine has a collection that's similar. Katie Saw edited, I think it's called Circles of Stone. So there's nothing wrong with a collection of classic out of copyright ghost stories, but I thought people might like some new ones or very old ones but retold in modern language. Oh dear. I have another question from Gemma B. Aside from having to add in a lot more women slaves, any particular problems in the adaptation process? I think for me personally, because of my personal preferences, trying to write some of these stories without talking about DV or assault. Oh, you do not want to know how long I spent trying to do the Nero one. That's the one that's book exclusive, and I've been umming and ahhing about doing it for the podcast for years. And it took me so long to kind of find a way into it that didn't involve going into massive amounts of detail about abuse. Again, not because I think there's anything wrong with writing or reading about that, but because for me personally, it isn't something I want to engage with particularly. And trying to do it in a way that was respectful, because again, Nero's not fictional. Nero's a real person and his victims are real people. So just not talking about it, I didn't want to do in a disrespectful way and let's just skim over it. So I think trying to work out what to do with the stories where I want to tell the story, but there is something at the heart of it that is not something I particularly enjoy writing about, was probably the biggest challenge. And finding ways of telling those stories as a fun, spooky ghost story and not as just something, horrible and depressing. So I think that was the biggest problem I had with the adaptation. And then depending on the story, some of them, the problem was not having enough. So trying to come up with an entire story for Curtius Rufus or Augustus's nursery based on 2 or 3 lines of text. And then the opposite problem for Lucan and Propertius of massive, massive texts and not wanting to literally just translate them because other people have already done that and probably better than me. But trying to do something creative where Lucan and Propertius did such a good job in the first place. That was quite a challenge. Oh dear. And Deeks is saying, would have thought short stories are less risky. Yeah, no, I think it's when they're collected into a book. So a lot of people read short stories in magazines or online journals. I think they're still pretty popular in magazines. It's something I thought about was, selling them individually. Because I've already published them on the podcast, they're not often eligible for submission to a magazine or a journal or something. Because technically they've already been self-published anyway. That was one of the other reasons I decided to go ahead and do it. Because I've put them on the podcast, they are technically self-published in audio form. So I might as well self-publish them in text form as well. Oh dear. I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's any more questions. Oh, 2 more. Russell Lowe, do you have plans to do signed copies? Oh yeah, that'd be fun. Yes, that is a good idea. I need to think about the logistics of it. Something I would like to do is go along to conventions in person. Like Comic-Con and Games Expo and stuff like that. And get myself a little stand to sell copies of the books in person, which obviously I could then sign. But yeah, signed copies, that's a good point. At some point, I want to set up a Patreon, and actually, that would be the ideal thing to do for that, wouldn't it? I hadn't even thought of that. Thank you, Russell. Um, I've been scratching my head thinking, if I want to set up a Patreon, what can I offer people? And the reason I'm not doing it right now is, again, that I cannot offer anything else. Like, oh, as I say, don't even ask what September has been like this year. Um, there is just nothing more I can do at the minute. But I'm hoping next year to set up a Patreon, and I've been trying to think, what can I realistically and sensibly offer people who are going to sign up to my Patreon? So one thing that I could look at doing would be, if you sign up for the slightly higher tier, you also get you have to pay me the postage, but you could get a signed copy of the book or something. Or you could, if you're a Patreon on the higher tier, you could ask for a signed copy of the book or buy one or something. I'll have to think about the logistics of it. But yeah, basically it's something that I would be totally up for doing. But I need to work out the logistics. Question from Gemma. Logistical question. How can we get the paperback version? Tomorrow. Tomorrow from Amazon. So yes, at the moment it will only be available from Amazon, and it will be on sale, I think, midnight tonight BST. Because I've not done this before, but I set the publication date as Tuesday the 1st of October. I decided to go for the 1st of October because Halloween. So from tomorrow, paperback will be available print on demand from Amazon. And yeah, I will definitely look into going to some events and selling it, in person. But I need to work out the logistics, and I also need to just get through the next few weeks at work. I have some lectures to write. Hi, students, if you're watching, I am going to write your lectures and PowerPoints, I promise. I'm getting there. Question from Deeks is, who designed the book cover? My friend Sam Basnet Illustration. So she has Instagram, TikTok, and a Substack, which I do not have. I have not looked into yet. But she is Sam Basnet Illustration on Instagram, TikTok, and Substack. And she does commissioned portraits, usually of houses. So she does things like portraits of people's wedding venues as a wedding present or an anniversary present. She does portraits of the house somebody grew up in, all that kind of thing. So yes, I asked her if she would be able to do my book cover. And yeah, she did a really good job, didn't she? I did the text, but Sam did the watercolor. Obviously, when you buy them tomorrow, they won't say not for resale on them. This is my author copy. So they'll look better when they don't say not for resale across the front. There we are. But yes, that is Sam's work. So yes, if you like her stuff and you are interested, probably if you're based in the UK Midlands or you have a lot of really good photos, because she does work from photos as well as life. This is from photos. I think I sent her a picture from Pompeii and a picture from Worcester, from not Worcester, sorry, Wroxeter Roman city, where they have a reconstructed villa. And I think she's kind of melded primarily the Pompeii house with a bit of the Wroxeter villa together to create a Roman house. Yeah, for the front cover of the book. So yes, brilliant stuff. Definitely look her up. I should probably spell that in the chat, shouldn't I? So I shall spell her name in the chat. I can't spell the word illustration. There we go. Oh yeah, it looks like the building they have at Wroxeter. Yes, I sent her Wroxeter as a reference point. Wroxeter and Pompeii, and I'm pretty sure that she's blended elements of the two villas. So obviously one original from Pompeii and one reconstructed from Wroxeter. Gemma says, given the Romans like to take cultural inspiration from the Greeks, are there any obvious connections to Greek ghost stories that carry through to Roman ones? Yes, they're both obsessed with people who've not been buried properly. So if you are not properly buried, you cannot cross the river Styx or any of the other rivers, because there's a few of them in the underworld. So that is, it's not unique to Greece and Rome. There are ghost stories from other parts of the world that if you've not been buried properly, you end up haunting people as well. They are very common in Greek and Roman ghost stories, as well as obviously several of these actually being set in Greece. I've very consciously given them a Roman time period and a kind of Roman period feel to them. They're all very much set in the Roman period. Technically, the title should be Ghost Stories from the Ancient Roman World. If it was an academic book, that's what I would have called it. But it's not an academic book, it's an artistic book. And Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome sounds better. So that's what it's called. But yeah, lot of crossover between Greek and Roman ghost stories. I'm trying to think if there's any real differences. I am hoping, we'll see, because it depends if this sells. If I sell any copies, I would like to do volume 2 from ancient Greece, which will include stories like Achilles and Patroclus that's been on the podcast. And Patroclus hasn't been properly buried, which is why he visits his ghost visits Achilles in a dream. There's also Elpenor from the Odyssey, who has a direct Roman counterpart, whose name I always forget from the Aeneid. I can't remember the Roman guy's name. I don't know why I always forget that guy's name. Anyway, and in fact, one of the ones that I was going to put in this book, I moved into the Greek one because it's actually a Roman story. I have done a story from Virgil on the podcast, from Virgil's Aeneid, and it is the story of Aeneas, who is escaping the burning of Troy in the Trojan War. And Aeneas is the ancestor of the Romans, according to their mythology. And he leaves his wife behind, and he realizes his wife's missing, and he's like, "Oh no, we have to go get her." And her ghost turns up to be like, "Too late." He got his dad, he got his son, which is good. He got the household gods, but he left his wife behind. And I was going to put it in this because it's a very famous Roman story. But I thought about it and I thought, well, the Trojan War is not in either Greece or Rome. It's in Troy. It's a Greek story set in Troy, and it takes place millennia before the Roman period, or a millennium before the Roman period, roughly. And I just thought, you know what? I know technically Virgil is Roman, obviously, and the poem is Latin, but I'm going to put it in the Greek volume because I think a story about the Trojan War is going to feel like a more natural fit in a collection of ghost stories from ancient Greece rather than ancient Rome. And probably the equivalent of the section where I've kind of got a collection of stories vaguely relating to emperors. Toward the back of this one, I think the equivalent of that in the Greek version is going to be the Trojan War, because I'm actually struggling to think of Greek ghost stories that aren't about the Trojan War. There's a couple. There's not very many. An awful lot of Greek ghost stories are about the Trojan War. They're really into it, and there's a lot of ghosts involved. I'm probably going to do the Oresteia for the podcast next week. Hopefully, if I get it done, don't as I say, yeah, life. But the idea is that next week, the YouTube video will be the podcast episode, which will be, I am thinking, the Oresteia and the Ghost of Clytemnestra, which also kind of goes with Dies Irae and the Ghost of Agrippina. I actually I made mention of Clytemnestra in that story because of the similarities. And Nero actually played Orestes. So Orestes in Greek mythology, Clytemnestra, his mother, has killed Agamemnon, his father, to avenge his sister Iphigenia, and Orestes kills Clytemnestra, and she and the Furies, or Eumenides, chase him and haunt him. And Nero actually played Orestes after ordering the murder of his mother, who had probably poisoned his adoptive father, Claudius. Nero was just not afraid of, well, anything until the point where he was assassinated, I suppose. He had a lot of conspiracies against him. That's how Lucan died. But Nero just, yeah, tact and diplomacy was not his strong point, Nero. Oh dear. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. I do natter. I appeared on France 24 once talking about the Rings of Power, and it was for this tiny segment. I was representing Den of Geek, who I freelance for, and France 24 English language asked for one of us to come on and talk about the Rings of Power, so I did via Zoom. And I was really aware that it was meant to be for this like 30-second segment. And they asked me these questions, and I just would not stop talking. I apologized to the woman at the end of the interview. I was like, I'm really sorry. I kept forgetting to say the question in the answer, which is what you're supposed to do when you get interviewed for TV. And I just talked and talked and talked. I think I've got so used to doing lectures where I just kind of ramble on for a little while that, yeah, I natter on and on and on and on, and it makes it really difficult. They have not asked me back to France 24 since then because I just don't stop talking. I just kind of fill the space until I run out of things to say. I have a lot in common with Bridget Jones, definitely. Yeah. Russell says no question on Tolkien can be answered in 30 seconds, and that's on them. Yeah, good point. Yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember it now. It was for season 1. And I know they were asking about it being the most expensive show ever and stuff like that. Because I think I'd come on and I was kind of checking all of my info about the legal situation around all the rights to Tolkien and what they're basing the show on, and the fact it's based on the appendices and not the Silmarillion and all that stuff. And yeah, they just kind of asked me about how expensive it was. And I said something about streaming services and high budget shows or something. Like hardly any of it was even about talking, but yeah, I definitely talked way too much on that one. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely drink as much as Bridget Jones, just to answer Deke's comment. I do have a lot in common with Bridget Jones. I mean, I actually no, I even was slightly younger than her when I had a baby, but not a lot. So I have a lot in common with Bridget Jones. Oh dear. Well, I shall give it a minute or two to see if anyone else has any more questions. I'll wave the book around again for anyone who's just joined. Welcome to the book launch for Creepy Classics. Well, I can't do the mirror thing. Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome. Pre-order now on the Kindle or buy it tomorrow in paperback or indeed on the Kindle. It will be available from Amazon tomorrow. I keep saying the title as well. I'm horribly aware that my name is impossible to spell. Because I always wanted to write fiction. I always wanted to write novels, or as it turns out, short stories. And I had always intended to use a pen name when I switched to fiction, literally just so that it would be easier to spell. And I thought I would make up a pen name and probably a JG just to, hide one's gender. Hopefully that doesn't matter so much anymore. Back in the 90s, that was a wise thing to do if you were writing epic fantasy, as I often was. And then, because this is like, I started the podcast connecting to my work as a lecturer. So the podcast relates to my research into ghost stories and folklore and ancient Roman religion and so on. That's why Rome is the first volume, by the way, and that's why there's more Roman stories than anything else. Ancient Roman myth, religion, and folklore is my academic specialism, along with reception in popular culture. So there's inevitably more Roman. That was kind of my starting point then for publishing it as a book. But yeah, the podcast relates to my academic work, and of course my academic work is already published in my name, because I did my PhD, and that's the name on the PhD certificate, and that's the name on the PhD, so that's the name on the book that was based on the PhD, which, I should sell my other book while I'm here, hang on. Let's not forget, I wrote another book. I got my royalty statement from this one today. I have earned £2 in the last 6 months, which is not enough to send me. I literally just opened that email before I came to do this. I had an email from Bloomsbury saying, here's your royalty statement. If it's under £50, we're not going to send you anything. And it had gone from £23 in March to £25, which, hey, that's up. Yay. Yeah. So this was the book of my PhD. So of course I published it under the same name as my PhD. And then the podcast started, which is related to my academic research. And, suddenly I realized that I'm publishing my collection of short stories and nobody's going to know that it's me, the person who does the Creepy Classics podcast, that it's from the podcast and that it relates to all this other stuff if I change my name. So I'm stuck with it. So, apologies to all my dear family. I know it's a beautiful name that we have, but no one can spell it because there's 2 S's in Harrison. If you Google me, Google will produce a bunch of people whose surname has 1 S in it and assume you've misspelled it. Yay! So I just keep repeating the title, because if you search Amazon for the title, you can find it. Trying to get Amazon to actually produce my name is friggin' impossible. Oh dear. Oh, well, thank you, Russell and Gemma, for saying you're looking forward to reading. Thank you. And yes, obviously, buy it anytime. Buy it for a loved one for Christmas or for Halloween, or yeah. Thank you. Oh dear. Oh well, I think I am losing viewers. It's so funny. Like I say, this is only the 3rd time I've done this, and the other 2 only had Moon Pie helped me so much with my first one where I was testing it and didn't know what I was doing, and Justin's leaning over my shoulder trying to work it out. So thank you, Moon Pie. And then the second one, I think hardly anybody, I think one person watched half of, and the rest of it was just kind of, it's there for people to watch afterwards. It doesn't really matter that it wasn't watched live. It was a tier ranking. So I'm not quite used to it. And it's quite funny the way it has this little thing telling me how many people are watching, which I'm sort of used to because I'm a lecturer, and people sometimes leave talks. They come in and out of talks you're giving at conferences, and students even just get up and leave sometimes. So it's not that I'm not used to it, but it is quite strange, like looking at the number of people and then watching them leave. It's quite funny. As I say, very used to it, but still, I think I've probably rabbited on quite enough. So unless anyone has any more questions, which I'm assuming not, because you would have asked them by now. Thank you so much, all of you, whether you came for all of it or some of it. Everybody is welcome for as much or as little as you want to watch. Thank you all so much for coming to my little virtual book launch. And yay, I have a book, well, a fiction book. I'm not going to lie, fiction means more to me than academic writing. I'm sorry, academia. I love my job, I love history, but fiction is like, that's my real passion. I really love to write fiction. So, not to talk down my other book, please buy that too. It's much more expensive though. I enjoyed writing that as well, and I'm very proud of it, but this one is the one that I really love. And it is more exciting to me to write and publish and hope people enjoy reading. So thank you so much for coming to my little book launch. And cheers. And hopefully see you all in the comments soon. I'm sure I'll do another live stream at some point. So yeah. Next time I kind of have a good idea for a live stream or want to do a tier ranking, probably. I'm sure I'll do another one. But yes, until then, happy Halloween in advance, because I don't think I'll have time to do another live stream before Halloween. So happy Halloween. Thank you so much for coming, and I will see you all soon.